I'm Nick von Wackerbarth, and you're listening to the VonDubCast. If you don't want to listen to me gap in the intro and you want to skip right to the interview, skip about 5 minutes. But before you do, please consider doing one of these couple things that really helps out the show. Following the social medias for the VonDubCast, subscribing, and leaving a review. If you could do those things, that'd be awesome. Also, give me a subscription on the YouTube channel. That'd be great too. All right. Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 71 of the VonDubCast. Special episode today with Angelo Isidoru from the Millennial. He writes for them and also does a YouTube show called Cancel This, where he has people on to talk about topics that aren't getting the airtime that they probably deserve, or there's some sort of taboo, one thing or another, that's preventing people from talking about them, and just bring someone on that has a lot of knowledge in that area, asks the questions that he's interested in, and kind of takes those subjects down a little bit of a few twists and turns and sees what can be found with them, especially given the fact that nobody else is talking about them. And I thought that was really interesting. There's one on Alberta secession that I thought was pretty interesting. A couple with some politicians that are pretty cool. And I just really like what he's doing. He's not steering away from what people are trying to steer people away from. He's steering right into it. And I think that is brave. And I think that is meaningful. And I think that's where the real meat of these issues that aren't seeming to get any better, I think that is because people aren't discussing them, and you need to have brave people like Angelo that are willing to put themselves out there and take whatever ridicule comes back their way to have these discussions, and I think that's awesome. So we were able to sit down and kind of shoot the shit. This is another one of those episodes where I didn't really know where it was going to go, just knew that he has a cool viewpoint, and kind of wherever the conversation goes, I knew I could get some cool new ways to look at these issues that have been, at the forefront of my mind and his mind and everybody's minds. And I really enjoyed the process. Had a really fun time recording this with him. Would have loved to do longer with him. I'm sure we'll have him back on the podcast to maybe dive into some of these more in-depth subjects. We kind of just cruised along the surface as a lot of them on this episode today, but I know we'll sometime in the future hop on and really go into the depths of what these topics deserve. So hope you guys enjoy this one. Like I say every week, if you could give me a follow on social media, Instagram page, Twitter page, YouTube page, things like that always really goes a long way. If you could share some of the posts, tell a friend about it. If this episode or any of the other episodes rings true to you and you enjoy it, please pass it on. That's how these things grow, and it means a lot to me. Same thing with all the messages I've been getting. Please keep those going. I love the conversations that are starting in the DMs. Like I always say, if you're brave enough to, bring these types of conversations out in the comments section on whatever social media of choice, I'd really enjoy that too, because that lets other people see that these conversations can happen and what it looks like when people respectfully have these types of discussions. But if you just want to DM me too, that is great too. I really enjoy the types of conversations that we're having. So yeah, other than that, I hope you guys are doing well. I've been having a hell of a month. It's been tough. We've had a puppy, not a lot of sleep. Work has been a nightmare, and it's a lot. And all the COVID rules and all this bullshit. I'm just so sick of all this stuff and people pretending that this is all up to us of when we can open up, even though there's entire states that have been open for over a year with no restrictions. It just drives me nuts. And I'm just at my breaking point with being able to take all this on and just take it in stride and not let it affect me. It's really affecting me. And I always, come on here and tell you guys to be strong. But, I've been telling myself that the last couple of weeks, it's tough. And I know it's summer and things are getting better and things are opening up, but it's easy to let it get you down, and you got to fight every day. And that's what I'm doing right now, is just fighting every day to, get out on the other side of it. And I know that things are going to get better and that this is all temporary, but man, is it easy to say and tougher to do. So yeah, I'm just trying my best to put a smile on every day and keep trucking through. And I know it'll get better. And I think it'd just be dishonest of me to come on here and say I'm doing great when I'm not. And just to be honest with you guys, sometimes I'll be doing great, sometimes I won't. And just to let you guys in on that and see where I am is all I can offer to you guys. And hopefully that gives you hope that you're not alone if you're feeling a similar way. And I hope that things turn around for you as well, and faster than you think it. These things always come and go with the times, and things are going to get better. So hope you enjoy this episode. We'll be back with more next Monday, and I'll see you guys then. All right. Bye. All right. Really fun episode here today. Got Angelo Isidoru here with me, and he has put out some amazing conversations on YouTube. That's where I've seen him. And just recently he did one with Jordan Peterson that really touched on a lot of important topics. And the further I get and the more topics that I saw was covered in your conversations, the more I realized kind of the spirit and the tone of areas where you're going. And it seems like to me, it's where conversation is stifled, or for whatever reason, society isn't allowing these conversations to take place, and you allow that to happen. And it allows for ideas to come forth that I think need to. And I'm very happy that you're doing that. And I have so many questions about where and why you got into that. But I just wanted to kind of start off by thanking you for getting into those areas. Because I know for a guy like me that was very frustrated for many years that these conversations weren't being allowed, and eventually culminated in myself trying to have them myself like we're doing right now. It's so nice to see other people doing that, because I know exactly the fear and so the consequences that can go into it and what holds people back from doing that. So I just want to start off with a thank you for doing that, and maybe just start off with asking you how that all came to be, where your passion started with that, and kind of how you got involved in making your voice heard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for having me, first of all. In terms of why I got into it, into the business of talking for a living, I guess, although I also write, I think certain people are wired for it. I've always enjoyed talking. I've always enjoyed conversations. And, I've enjoyed listening to other conversations.
Yeah.
So I think it just got to a point where I felt I had a abnormal interest in talking to interesting people.
Yeah.
And I felt as though a lot of conversations I was having, I felt like, well, this would be good if it was recorded and we can, listen to it again or share it with people. So I've been a long time podcast listener, and I avoided the temptation for a long time to be yet another straight white male in his early 20s with a podcast.
Yeah.
But here we are. And that's what I'm doing now. So I have canceled this. I think we're on episode 23 now, and it's been successful. At the end of the day, like, the philosophy I've adopted is essentially just talking to people who I find interesting. And recently that was Dr. Jordan Peterson, who I've known for a while, but it also includes others like Gad Saad and Janice Fiamengo and Megan Murphy. I've been sort of privileged to have a previous relationship with a lot of these people, because when I was in university, I ran the Free Speech Club at UBC, which is sort of a very prominent free speech club in Canada. And I would host these speakers. I hosted Jordan Peterson a ton of times. I, brought them in front of tons of audiences.
Right.
And now that we're in the COVID world, I can't do those events anymore.
Right.
So I sort of thought, well, screw it. Let's just make everything digital and just, show these shows in a digital format instead. So that's just my passion for it. I just like talking to people.
Right. And that's very interesting to me, the Free Speech Club, because that's it sounded like you were familiar with so many of these names that I've found recently. It seems like you have a deep relationship with them. And I was curious where a lot of that comes from, but running a free speech club on campus would definitely run you into the same circles as some of these names that, like you said, like God Sada, I just read his book maybe a couple months ago, and just so well written and so nice to have so much of the things that you're seeing and you're feeling articulated in a way that somebody's really thought deeply about. I feel the very same way about Jordan Peterson on a lot of this, but I'm curious then to reverse back all the way to there. How did you find the Free Speech Club? Did you create it? Was it something that you took over that was already existing that you started to run? I'm just kind of curious where you got into that. I'm trying to get back to the real impetus, to the real why, where it all created, because it usually all goes back to something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the culture war itself, I was sort of subject to it. I remember I graduated high school in like 2015. And what I found was, going into college and university, as someone who likes talking about lots of different things, you just weren't allowed.
Right.
I've just always had a very natural inclination to want to talk about topics that are even controversial, and you just weren't allowed. And I discovered, my school had a free speech club. So it existed prior to me. And I just joined it, and it just becomes this natural, organic thing where at first you have 10 members, then 100, and then eventually like 5,000. And it got to a point where I thought, hey, there's this professor who's really controversial in Toronto, and he's making all these headlines. Like, what if I flew him here for a lecture? and that was, Dr. Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
The first event I had with him was like in early 2017. So early days.
Yeah.
And then I just continued doing that. I just found it interesting to listen to ideas that are, not only controversial, but would make certain people freak out entirely. It just raises my curiosity more to see what it's all about. Not everything I listen to, not everything I platform I agree with, but it's free speech. And I'm curious to see if sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I'm just really fascinated by some of these people. I mean, getting the opportunity to not only host, but sit down with these people and just listen to them, that's a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
And to record it on top of that is immensely valuable for people. I mean, that's probably the most gratifying aspect of it, is whenever I would host a large event, or even now with the podcast, people saying, hey, like, I love what you're doing. I listen to it on my work shift or whatever. Just the fact that someone would sit and listen to me for like an hour and a half, it's like, there's nothing more gratifying than that, because, I wasn't like amazing at math, wasn't really great at sports. I wasn't really like great at that many things, but I always found that I was good enough to hold a conversation. So I'm like, well, I'm going to have to find a way to talk for a living. So yeah, the Free Speech Club grew from there, and we just kept on doing events. The largest event we hosted was Ben Shapiro.
Wow.
Cool.
Cool.
And we had that on Halloween night of 2018, like sold out theater in the middle of Vancouver. Just crazy event. I would actually allow, the people who dislike him the most, I would say, like, don't protest, like, come to the show. I'll give you a ticket and I'll let you jump the line.
Yeah.
Because I was worried that, the Q&As for these things, because the ticket's so expensive, the Q&As are always just like guys who like love the speaker, right?
Yeah.
So like, I want it to be a little saucier. So I would always like let the big dissenters like jump the queue and debate. And it makes for not only great content, but it's just more entertaining for the people there. The fact that I would see people in the audience at a Jordan Peterson event taking notes, it's immensely gratifying. And obviously it's more gratifying for him because he's the one speaking, but it's gratifying for me by virtue of the fact that I organized it and I set it up. So I'm happy to be that fly on the wall for these amazing intellectuals.
Right. And I love what you're saying about that of bringing in, because I feel like that's where the real, that's where the good fruit of the orchard is. It's high up on those trees, but you need a little bit of sauciness, like you said, for that to come out, for those ideas to be tested and to try and find ways to enter that into your system, whatever that is. That's something I find a lot of with the podcast, is so much of the ideas I want to cover. I find there's kind of three options. Either you bring up a topic with somebody that is so unfamiliar with it that it's hard to even get that volley going back and forth, where it's almost you talking at them. And sometimes there's good things that come up, or else you get somebody that really knows it as well. And you guys can really attack it from one side. Like I've had some people from that Peterson Pals group on the podcast, and you talk about some of these issues and they know the one side so well, you can really cover that. And what I really want to do is bring, like you say, bring on the other side to try and show what that is and really test the ideas. And I find that's the hardest thing to get people on the podcast is from the dissenting. I get so many, free speech guys and people that really value the same things that I value, but it's hard to really push the conversation to that point and to really see the full extent of the outer bounds of it with that. And I found with the podcast, that's a little bit tough to do. And I'm wondering if you see that yourself. And then also I'm curious, because the way I do this podcast, it's completely on my own. I have nobody that says anything, but because you are tied to Post Millennial as well, do you see that they have that vision for the group as a whole? And do you ever find that with some of the things you want to bring in, if you want to bring in a little bit of that dissenting opinion, do you find you're pressured because of the narrative of the scope of where that show goes, that they leave you that latitude to bring on whoever you want so that you can bring that in if you want to?
Yeah, I mean, as far as TPM goes, I have carte blanche in terms of who I want to speak to.
Perfect. Right? That's good to hear.
Like you said, it's immensely difficult. And it's immensely difficult to get the other side. And I've come to the realization that it's not because you disagree. It's because, I should preface, it's not because you disagree on an opinion. It's because you disagree on your entire perception of reality. Like we've become that divided now. where, quite frankly, it's a form of tribalism where imagine you have two tribes. One tribe worships the moon. The other tribe thinks the moon is the devil. Mm-hmm. Like your languages are just so opposite.
Right.
That how do you sustain a conversation with someone who perhaps doesn't believe in conversation? Mm-hmm. Someone who only believes in a postmodern polemicism. It's very difficult. The most I've seen of it, at least jumping back to when I hosted events, I really, really wanted the other side. And who I managed to get, I couldn't get anyone else, was ContraPoints. So if you're familiar with ContraPoints, no. She's a transgender socialist YouTuber, super popular. And we held an event about sort of deconstructing gender, and we didn't sell tickets for it. We instead raised money for the Trevor Project, which is a suicide hotline for gay teens.
Wow.
So it's a super left-wing event. Like the crowd at that event were people who would never go to any other event. And it was successful. It did well, but it was very difficult. It was very taxing to try and get people to go, because there were tons of people who said, oh, well, I like you, Contra, but I hate the Free Speech Club, or I hate Angelo Isidoru, so I can't reconcile that.
Right.
Can't go. It was so difficult. And for years, I've continued to try and do that. When it comes to platforming liberals, there's no issue there at all, because I separate leftists and liberals. Mm-hmm. Brett Weinstein, I've hosted him before.
Wow.
Totally open.
One of my heroes.
Totally, totally available.
Yeah.
Progressive, he's there. He's willing to talk. So where that opportunity is affronted or offered, I certainly take it. But when it comes to the podcast, it's so difficult. Like I've tried reaching out to, well, I won't say names, but to me, I'm interested in hearing opposing ideas. I get really interested in meeting people who are super different. I've always been fascinated by really different people. And, there's this one guy I know who follows all my stuff, and he was actually part of the Free Speech Club. And he's in his 70s, and he's a hippie, and he's a nudist.
Nice.
And he popularized a famous beach in Vancouver that's like a nude beach. So he's just this really interesting guy.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
That I'm fascinated with. And he's a total leftist. He's super left wing, but he feels like the left him because he's like a flower child.
Yeah.
He's like, no, we're supposed to be all about openness and talking and this and that. So I'm just I'll sit down and talk to him for hours if I can. Right. So, I think not only is it something I'm interested in, but it's also morally important to show both sides.
Right.
To be this is not an echo chamber, because it is an inevitability where you become enslaved to your audience.
Yeah.
You see it happen even with Joe Rogan, where sometimes you'll have on someone who's really left wing and the video will be all dislikes. Right. So it's there definitely, but it's just so difficult.
Right. And, I'm curious if you have any of these little things, but there's certain little things I try to do because I do see that and I do worry about that. And I see very much a similar thing that you do is when you reach out and try to bring on a bit of that, or somebody that falls into that range, one of those people that might be very hard to argue in that conversation, be very hard to have, but it's very important to have. I think it's one of those things where you still want to create an environment where if they were to come on, or take away their excuses for not wanting to come on. I try to make sure that every guest I have on, when those ideas come up, even if they're very far from my own, I try to treat them with respect, and I try to have compassion and look for the systems and look for the logical fallacies, which is a lot of the time in the circular logic that gets them to that position. So that you blame the ideas themselves, not the people that fall for them, and you show compassion for the situation that gets them into that. Because I think one of the traps is like you had said earlier, sometimes there's these people that are so into their ideology that you can't even have a conversation with them, right? And I feel like it's an easy trap to fall into, to then know that is true and that exists in the world, and then to start labeling people that may not be totally fallen off that cliff, because I think the way everything gets blown up, it seems like those people are everywhere, but I think they're very rare. I think that person that is so indoctrinated, so over the top. And I think when you walk onto a campus, it gives you a really rough idea of what that is, because you see it everywhere and you see these people everywhere. But then in the real world, it's not so much. And I feel like there's people that could be swayed back to your side with compassionate arguments, and especially trying to bring it in, or put it in terms where I can show you that I understand where you're coming from and I understand the strongest points of what you are, right? Like sometimes these ideologies wouldn't work if there wasn't some good to them, or some noble goals at least, right? Like even if the good that they're proposing isn't actually there when you flush the idea out completely, there's usually a noble goal behind it. And if you can show that you understand that, and now you can maybe say like, okay, so from your idea, from listening to you talk, this is what it seems like you're after. I agree with that. And I agree with what you're after, but maybe going after that same goal in this different way would be effective. And I feel like you can bring people in. And I feel like the temptation to lose that piece and just to do the same thing everybody else is doing and vilify them and just write them off as if you can't even have a conversation with them is so deep. And it's hard. I find for myself personally, it's really hard to force myself to keep that open mind and to keep that, it sounds really cliche, but kind of leading with love and compassion for everybody at all times, so that you don't, and you always leave that door open for if people want to realize that, hey, maybe some of these ideas I've really been living my life by aren't serving me well and are actually hindering me from progress. I want to make a change, and that's okay. And they can come on board and see this and have people to be like, oh yeah, there are some values to free speech. You know, the scientific method is not racist. There's actually can be really empowering and those types of things. So those are kind of the ways I try to. Do you see that as a goal that you try and do with your writing, your speaking, the events you put on, and maybe what other ways do you try and keep that spirit alive to leave that room open for people to change?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult again, because if you encounter someone who is completely ideological, for example, if I came on here and you're a person who fundamentally believes, yeah, Jordan Peterson's exactly like Red Skull.
Yeah.
A demonic, evil Nazi.
Yeah.
It's like, we can't have a conversation.
Right.
If you are at that level where society is evil, capitalism needs to be obliterated, Jordan Peterson is a murderous, genocidal person, right. Where do I even begin to extend an olive branch, mm-hmm. right? But I think with others, people who are more so in the middle, it's not a matter of persuading them, but it's a matter of you extend a little bit and they extend a little bit, and you find that this golden middle. Mm-hmm. The problem there, of course, is that those people aren't so opinionated. So if you talk to them, if I was sort of one of those guys and I came on here and you talk to me about something, I'll be like, yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, they're not going to die on any hill, right?
Right.
So sort of like you have to be both philosophically aware and moderate, which mm-hmm. is very rare. I mean, something that I think is helping, despite the culture getting worse, is podcasting, is discussion. Something that I've noticed has been really big has been the fact that on Twitter, I guess Twitter has made a copycat version of Clubhouse, if you're familiar with Clubhouse.
Yeah, Twitter Spaces or something.
Twitter Spaces, Twitter Rooms. So I know Facebook is doing the same. Essentially, for those who don't know, it's a room where you go in digitally and you can listen to people talk and they can promote you to a speaker. And it's like a digital panel. Mm-hmm. It might as well be a large phone call. And what I noticed, particularly after the latest conservative convention, I was in a room. It was Andrew Lawton. It was a very conservative room. And there was someone who was a total liberal that was there, diametrically opposed to anything conservative. And the fact that you're speaking to each other makes it more difficult to hate each other and mm-hmm. to slander each other. Mm-hmm. Like the discussion was so civil. And unless it's just a coincidence, I don't think it is.
I don't think so at all.
The discussion was so civil that at some point I stopped everyone. I said, you realize we're on Twitter right now. Like, we're supposed to be like hating each other, mm-hmm. but we're all sort of meeting in the middle with everything. So that tribalism is gone. And I would say furthermore to that, being in person is even more. Yeah. Right. Can't do that now because the world ended. But when we were allowed to meet in person, it's very difficult to call you, a Red Skull Nazi when mm-hmm. we're in an elevator together.
Yeah.
right?
There's consequences.
There's consequences. And it's difficult to also do that over a phone call.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do that over text. So I think the internet has unfortunately amplified some of our worst attributes and good attributes, but in this case, worse. So I would say, to that end of having more discussions, meeting that golden middle, it has to be done through podcasting.
Yeah. And I knew this, I had a feeling this would happen because I think we're very similar people. And I think we have gotten to the place where we want to speak out for very similar reasons. And I also see the power of that because, and I think that's where I try and use that. And I try to educate people to that is these aren't bad people. These are bad systems that are allowing the worst parts of what is in all of us. This parts of our human nature just comes out. Social media is designed for that, right? Like I love that example where when you're conversating with somebody, all this stuff goes away, right? When you're allowed to have some sort of long form discussion where it's not just 140 characters, it's very different from what people see. And I also liked what you said about those people that are not willing to die on those hills, because you see, I've had people on my podcast in the past where when you look at them on social media, they're exactly what we're talking about. They're just sharing things about reading things, getting on board, just very much finding an identity in something, even though it's very misleading and actually causing harm to the goal. Like we talked about, the noble goals that are underneath are actually harming them more than they're good. I had them on, we had a discussion about it, and they're showing me that they understand these concepts, that, there's better ways to do this, all this stuff. Like the world isn't as bad as it seems. And when you keep perpetuating that, you're actually holding people down and giving them, victim narratives to fall into. And then a couple weeks later, they're back doing the same thing. And it's like, you're so right. It's so deep that you can have a conversation with them when they're on the right medium. That's why I'm trying to, every time I talk about this stuff, it's saying these aren't bad people. It's just this, there's so many things incentivizing. There's so much money to be made off keeping them in that system that by blaming that, it's just like the other way when people don't understand why, when people on the traditional left try and criticize the right for not seeing these very obvious things in front of them. It's like there's a whole system making money and propping up the values that they're showing. Like, how can you blame them for not seeing your side? Like, once you see the systems around it that are helping create this and are tapping into these things that are very natural and very evolutionary, I feel like that's where you see people that have evolutionary backgrounds and psychology backgrounds be so cued into the stuff of saying like, hey, wait, you're just playing a game. Like this is, you're playing with a piece of human nature that is not, we're outside of the realm of objectivity, and you're just playing games now, right? And I feel like that's where those people get demonized, like Brett Weinstein, right? Like one of those guys that is, if you listen to him talk for more than 10 minutes, he is harmless and he really has a real care in his heart and he really wants to help people. But because of his skill set, it takes away some of those things that people build their entire personalities around, and that seems like an attack on them. So now, because they have to invent attacks in his words because their ideology has been attacked, and it's like their religion, right? And it becomes to this point where you see all the reasons why this thing is happening and all the reasons why it's so hard to get to them. And yet it's still so hard not to fall into that trap to do the same thing and demonize them for it, right? Like it's something I struggle with every day. And I feel like that is a struggle that needs to be brought more to light, because I see it even in the Peterson Pals group, like where it's some of the most amazing people, the conversations that happen, very polite, but you still see that same trap falling into. And I just wonder.
Well, it's human nature. It's just human nature at the end of the day. It's very hard to evolve past it. And the thing is, like, we are various vocal minorities, right? We say, well, does the crazy SJW side really matter when there's so few of them? And the answer is yes, because although they're a minority, they're so vocal that they're influencing the rest of culture, which is more like apathetic.
Right.
They'll passively share, they'll passively vote in a certain way. I don't want to say people are sheep, but people aren't junkies for politics the way we are. So people have jobs and they have lives and they don't have time to go through 10 pages of Google to figure out what's what.
And they've been conditioned to the easy way out all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, it's just the way social media is, as well as that it tempts you to share tribal content. I mean, I had a friend, a Facebook friend who's known me a bit. And I noticed, I got like hardcore canceled last month. And I had like a bunch of mainstream outlets attacking me. And he shared an article that was attacking me, calling me a white supremacist.
Right.
And like, I messaged him and I'm like, why didn't you just come to me? Like, why are you sharing it? And he's like, oh, well, I'm just sharing it because the my sister shared it and my friend shared it. So I'm just, I didn't mean it. I'll delete it. And then deleted the post. And it's like, it's so flagrant. It's like, didn't you put any thought into that or any consideration? It's like, well, no, it's just, everyone else has the filter on their profile. So I'll do the filter as well and fit in and this and that. Again, you don't blame people because people are busy and they have busy lives and they don't have the time to sit around and get all existential about philosophy like we do. Right.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to get to that point where you're like chronically self-aware,
right?
That you're like, that you may be sharing bullshit or you may be participating in something that's tribal, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's so difficult for people, but I think podcasting is the remedy because for a lot of people that I've noticed, they'll listen to podcasting while they're working, while they're doing something. And I think because it's long form, over time, they develop a relationship with you.
Yeah.
Over time, they begin to I don't want to say question things more because that sounds conspiratorial, but they just become more aware of things and more interested in being aware of things, right? It's not a 2-minute soundbite. It's not, CNN or Fox News giving you a 2-minute soundbite about something.
Yeah.
It's a long conversation that's very human. So I think that's why, again, I mean, I'm praising podcasting as a medium on a podcast.
Yeah.
But I think that it's the remedy to it.
And I think one of the biggest pieces of that, just to expand on what you're saying, is I think in longer form, I think when you have a short time frame, it's easy to look polished and it's easy to look like you know everything. And I feel like once you expand that out, it forces people to be honest about where those boundaries lie and to be honest and say, hey, I don't really know about that. Right? When you brought up you brought up a name earlier. No idea, never heard it before, right? And I can say that because there's no sense in me pretending, because eventually throughout this conversation, it's going to come out that I don't know what I'm talking about on that. And I feel like that is a huge piece, is to see people that you really look up to, right? Like that was you're describing exactly my journey, was finding podcasting, these people I really look up to, and then seeing them say, okay, it's okay to say, I don't know, and that I'm ignorant about this, and the power in finding your own ignorance. And instead of, you said you didn't want to say it makes people question things more because it becomes more conspiratorial. I think the same thing, just framed differently, is more people are waking up to their own ignorance. So they're becoming less attached to knowing what they're talking about. And it's the same thing. It still makes you question more because you just realize, hey, I need to ask more questions because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I feel like that is one of the biggest things that it teaches and that it shows. And I feel like just like you say, the form itself of just expanding it out past those 5-minute segments, 8 minutes in jack between commercials really changes how that is. And it really shows people where they are, what they can be. Because I think also now that's a very unrealistic thing to show somebody, is now these experts come on TV with these 3-minute prepackaged things. And now people, oh, that's what I have to be. That is the high mark. And well, that's never going to be me. That's not attainable. That doesn't seem like something I would have to study 10 years on this one subject. Where if you are okay saying, well, I don't know, I know a lot of things about a lot of things, but I know very little expertise wise, right? Like, to be that generalist. And I feel like that is the message that's changing and people are waking up to, because I think it unlocks potential for people, that you can listen to a podcast and you can see the potential of, hey, that's not that hard. Like I can learn that, or if you want to bring it back to Jordan Peterson, some small things. Well, I can clean my room. I can do this. I can do this. I can admit when I don't know what I think. I can, instead of just hiding things in the fog, like he would say, you can bring things to the forefront. And I feel like that is so powerful and such a message that all comes within that medium of podcasting, or just any. And I think it's not just podcasting. I think it's anything that is untouched. It comes from one person's brain out. I feel like YouTube channels can be that. I feel like Twitch streams. I feel like anything content wise that isn't prepackaged or has 10 different people telling you what to do, those lessons come forward.
Yeah. Well, it explains why mainstream media is failing now, because people aren't subscribing to that. If we want to get objective, I think what's made Joe Rogan so successful is the fact that he is the everyman. He's not this ideological host. He's like, I'm a dumbass and I'm just a fly on the wall listening to what you're saying.
Yeah.
So then when we listen, we can transport ourselves, like, literally in his sort of mindset. And, I think that's not only a good thing to do, it's endearing. It looks better.
Yeah.
I do it very awarely. I mean, I spoke to Dr. Deborah So, who wrote this book on, the dangers of gender identity and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like so ignorant on the topic. Like I'll say like I am an idiot when it comes to the realities of transgender issues. This like I don't know. So tell me, I am asking her as if I was at a party and I met her there and I'm asking her about it.
Yeah.
Right.
And another thing I just want to add on to that, because I feel the exact same way, but with all the society change and all the education that's supposed to be coming out to make that so that isn't a reality, there's less people that are that ignorant like me and you. With all that, I haven't learned a thing. But you know where I've learned the most about transgender issues is listening to a podcast where an actual transgender person comes on for 3 hours and tells their experience.
Yeah.
And they'll explain to you. And I've learned so much about transgender issues, about race issues from that. And all these multi-billion-dollar campaigns to try and teach you and educate have done jack shit, has not touched me, has not penetrated my mind, but those have, right? Ari Shaffir, one of the most, flagrant comedians out there. He's had transgender people on his podcast probably 3 or 4 times. And in each one of those podcasts, I have learned more in that couple hours than I have. And it's because he asks inappropriate questions. It's not PC. It's all this stuff. And that person, because there's a relationship there and they know he's a good person, they laugh about it and they show it and they show, because those are the actual questions that a guy like me wants to know, and to have them answered in a serious way and to show the harm of the way I was thinking before and how it propagates and the ways I can be a better person. That is so effective. But you see people.
Well, it's rare. It's rare. I mean, I remember, I think Eric Weinstein had the porn star Riley Reid.
Yeah.
I think her name is.
What an amazing conversation.
And it's like, you sit there and it's like, I would have never gotten the chance probably in my life to hear that conversation, but it changes you. You're right. The education system completely failed. I mean, I studied psychology. I said this in the Jordan Peterson interview. I learned more from him from free YouTube videos than I did from school. We never talked about Piaget. We never talked about any of that, right? So what does it tell you about the fact that, well, put it this way. If you live in a foreign country and you don't speak the language, you're going to pick up the language eventually.
Right.
Like it's just human nature that you are surrounded by those people. When you surround yourself with these discussions, you're inevitably going to be a bit of a chameleon and pick up the knowledge, right? Because when you're watching a podcast or listening to it, but I tend to watch them, you're not at home watching it. You're not at work watching it. You are mentally, at least the way your lizard brain thinks, you're there.
Yeah.
You're sitting there next to them listening, right? You can't talk, but you're there. So I think psychologically, like you said, Ari Shaffir has someone who's transgender on, and he asks questions that are not these esoteric, weird gender questions that you don't even know, like, what am I even doing here, sort of thing. He's asking questions that I would ask and that you would ask.
Yeah.
Like
genuine
really
curiosity.
Basics. Yeah. That's what it is. At the end of the day, like you asked me, why am I interested in podcasting? Why do we do all this? It's plain old curiosity. And I think what's sad is that I think part of the left has failed to understand that a lot of the people they hate, a lot of the deplorables, are very, persuadable if you just extended an olive branch and talked. I've often thought about the fact that would I be, right wing if I had grown up in a time when the most popular up and coming videos were left wing oriented, when it was controversial to be left wing, when it was, the establishment was right wing? Would I have gone the other way?
Right.
If, say, there was, a left wing version of Jordan Peterson that was just as inviting, would I have developed my ideology in a totally different way as a young person, right? Because we're trying to figure it out. That didn't happen. So that's why you have a generation of young people now. It's like, you can't blame us when the only side that was like, hey, like, come here so we can talk about these issues was, the right. Right. Like, it's just when the other side is saying, not only do I want to engage in dialogue with you, but I think you're evil and you're part of the problem. and you inherently have privilege and you're a terrible person. It's like, fuck you.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to engage in that.
But I worry about extensively past that, because I agree so much, but that I think the right and the left are both doing the same thing at the far ends. I think on the middle, like these center right speakers that are very inviting, like you're talking about, they bring you in. I feel like that is one thing, but it's so easy to then get, okay, I'm in the door, and then get sucked all the way past, and now you're so far onto that side. And the reason being is because I see the right and the left as the exact same thing. I feel like just the political system as it stands, I feel like there's a lot more temperament. I'm trying to find the right way to say this. I feel like it's so broken that we need something else altogether. I feel like I was so enlightened by the Unity project that Brett Weinstein put together. And I was just from the very start, just a huge proponent, went to every campfire, went to every one of those things. So I just saw that is what we need. And I feel like so many people wake up to these lessons that people aren't actually out for your best interests, even if they say, like, the leaders of these tribes that everybody's getting into are not really out for your best interests. What your best interest is to embetter yourself. A lot of what Jordan Peterson talks about, a lot of his people paint him as a right-wing guy, but what he's saying is not right-wing at all or left-wing. It's self-accountability. Do things that are better for you, hold yourself to a higher standard, all these types of things. And I feel like that is the true message that needs to change. And I feel like neither the left or the right institutionally are sending that message and are actually afraid of that message. I think that message is what takes away their power. I think there's a lot of power in holding that two-party structure. And I know that you could throw a lot of things at that, but essentially it is a two-party structure almost everywhere, right? Like it is, things are so polarized that it just develops to that. And I feel like I worry sometimes that as inviting as the right wing seems to be, I don't think that is the solution in the long term. And I feel like it just almost repropagates the same issue and gives that crazy left wing the fire, because it's just pulling people over and it's just pulling people farther apart. Whereas it needs to be the message of breaking it down altogether, and people need to find a better goal, and we need to have more accountability systems built into all these things. I think you need to take Jordan Peterson's love message to the individual and expand that societally, right? Like, how can we have better aims for our politicians? How can we have better aim for our education system, our medical system? How do we, get all those types of things back into there and not just fall into the, okay, well, the left is going crazy, I'm going to go right now, when they're just as crazy. I feel like that's where my struggle is. And that's where I try to keep as open to that as I can, and attacking both sides equally, and while leaving compassion for people to leave them and come into the middle. It's such a tough thing to do. And I'm just curious where you see it, because that's where I see so much of the downfall lately.
Yeah, well, it's reactive, right? Yeah. A lot of it is reactive. Right. And I mean, I've noticed it especially when you have an audience, you do become enslaved to it. Like, look, I was very critical of the QAnon stuff, on the right. I was really critical of that. And a lot of right-wingers get upset. But it's like, you have to understand that by buying into the behavior of it, you're excluding so many people.
Yes.
You're so far off the deep end, right? Like, you have to be principled. And I think having principles is the means by which you can eliminate ideology. Right. Because you're not going to be influenced by, whatever. I think the hill you're going to die on can't be red team and it can't be blue team. It's very tempting to be like, I'm team red team. Yeah. And the red team is going to get in and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It's like, it's not the way it goes. Right. Especially with politicians. Like, I work in politics. Most politicians are full of shit. Right. Most politicians are opportunists who are just taking advantage of your tribalism. And
I think it's the system that creates that. And I feel like that's another area where I try to keep that compassion for the people within it and attack the system that creates it. I feel like it's selecting error. It asks for those people to come in because it opens the door for them to succeed, but then it also twists and turns those people, because I think I know multiple people that have played politics on a municipal level, really want to make change for their communities, right? Rural Alberta, Northern Alberta, where I live, I see that. And you see them grow and get to these points, and you see the system change them. And now where they went in, where they were principled, that if you want to succeed, those principles have to go out the window. And that's where I think we need to make sure we keep that message on. That's always my message about politicians. It's not that they're evil people. It's an evil system that is propagated to make that happen, right? It's almost it's a feature, not a bug kind of thing, right? To put it in the language of the AI people.
Yeah, precisely. And I mean, speaking of AI, apparently Jordan Peterson's going to be speaking to Elon Musk soon.
Oh yeah.
That would be just, again, discussions that if they were private, if there was no podcasting, it would not exist. Like we would have never in our lives would we be able to listen to it, right?
Exactly.
So I'm all there for all that stuff.
Curious, this might be from left wing, but or from left field. Lex Friedman, how aware of him are you in some of his interactions? I feel like he's got his own kind of wing of this whole thing, and he's somebody that I probably look up to almost the most, other than anybody, and who I've learned from and who I emulate the most in my thinking and what I want to bring forward. And I'm curious where you see him on the grand stage, and where you, or just how aware of him you are.
I can't say that I am. The name sounds very familiar, but so what's his deal? What's he?
So he was an AI researcher at MIT. He was very principled, like you say. He hails from Russia. His dad was a plasma physicist, I believe, in Russia, and they came over to the States, and he's working at MIT, and he started a podcast probably. First he got onto Joe Rogan, right? He was friends with them. He's a big MMA guy, jiu-jitsu black belt, did judo and stuff, and was very into it. But he's just a brilliant mind, and almost the eternal optimist and the eternal he takes the message of kind of, I think, what is at the basis of Joe Rogan, of that leading with love. And Rogan has tough love in a lot of ways, but it is centered, and he is a good person. But I feel like Lex is the pure love version of Rogan, where it's this high intellectual, high rigor, doesn't let bad ideas stand in front of him. He will call you on any of your shit, but it's all through love and compassion. And now he's just having the brightest minds on, because he's such a genius. He's had Elon on a bunch of times. He has these leading scientists in all these different areas, and takes these huge level concepts of like the leading in quantum mechanics or like Python and these computer languages and how they get created. And he can bring it down to a level where somebody like me, an idiot like me, can understand it. And now I get these 3-hour conversations with the highest minds in the world that are now, it's almost like he can translate. It's like he can speak genius and translate it to dumb, and it's, I get so much out of his. Like, it used to always be Joe Rogan was my guy as soon as one of his podcasts come out, right? And then you have your ranking of all the different podcasts you listen to, but it's usually that order, right? Like, I feel like in the last couple of years, Lex has completely taken over that. And I feel like people don't realize what a powerhouse he is and how much he's already extremely influential. But I think in the next 3 or 4 years, you're going to see him overtake so many of these voices, and he's going to become it. And he's so principled. If you look at his house, he has like a bed and a TV and his computer, and he doesn't really keep anything, super minimalist. And he's just the exact spirit of, I think, what I'm trying to say is to be completely unattached from all these games and just look at everything from first principles. That is the way he lives his life. And I feel like his message, along with Jordan Peterson and all these people, and he has these people on his interviews with Eric Weinstein, I feel like might be some of the best conversations I've ever seen. But definitely, if you haven't heard him, you've got to check him out. You will absolutely love him. I promise. He's one of these people that brings these ideas and really articulates them for people like us then to try and bring out to the masses. I feel like the work that he's doing right now is maybe more influential than people like Peterson and Rogan and stuff. I just feel like people don't realize it yet.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's high praise. I'll have to check it out.
You'll love it. And one other thing I was just wanted to mention earlier about staying genuine and the genuine curiosity, because something that I wanted to ask you about is, for my podcast, I have the freedom to kind of go in all these different directions, right? Like these subjects that we talked about today are so passionate that I find they keep coming up on every podcast. Even if I have somebody on trying to get away from it, it comes back because I have a lot of passion there. But I still open the door. I have, hockey players on. I'm trying to get like esports players on, because I have all these different interests. I'm so all over the map with what my interests are. But I worry about, because I started having these types of conversations, I was almost pigeonholed at the start to that. And I'm very genuine with it right now. But something I see in people is they have such a genuine passion for a subject that they build up this fan base, like you said, and you become beholden to them. And then either they need to change their principles to match that, right? Like, I feel like I love Ben Shapiro, I think he's amazing. But I think there's times where I can see through him where it's like, I don't even think you believe what you're saying right now, but it fits what you are. And I know he's smart enough to know that. And I know he probably categorizes that in his head and is able to still work through. And I get that. But I worry about that happening because I feel like that is, to me, that seems like it would be one of the most stressful things to not just have my own genuine, whatever interests me on that day. Is that something that you worry about with having these types of conversations, that you're going to get yourself to a point where it's no longer, you're still curious, but it's no longer as genuine as it used to be, but you're forced to hold that up?
Yeah, well, it's happened to so many, right? Like I won't say who, but it's happened to a lot of figures where they become essentially a vessel for the audience. They become enslaved to the audience.
Yeah.
And it's a massive problem. I'm absolutely worried about it. I'm worried about the content as well in terms of the topics. Like most of what I've done is political. But the problem is that I think, like you, I'm very eclectic. I wish I could have someone on to talk about film and we can talk about movies the whole time. But, if I had the opportunity to talk to Quentin Tarantino for 2 hours, I would take it.
Yeah.
The problem is the audience that I've built that is mainly conservative political. Are they going to be like, what's this shit?
Yeah.
To give you another example, someone who I really want to speak to soon, and I've been trying to plan it out and I've just been swamped, is Jonathan Pajot. Because I know Jonathan, he's an iconographer and he's been very close to working with Jordan. And I'm Greek Orthodox. He's Orthodox as well. So we have that in common. And I want to talk to him about iconography and icon carving for an hour. But how do because I'm not going to talk to them about politics. I'm not going to have an artist on to talk to them about politics because they won't want to, right? Like, I just want to talk about what the person wants to talk about. When I had Dr. Peterson on, if you noticed, we didn't touch on his health because he's talked about it before. He doesn't want to talk about it, right? We didn't really even touch on politics. I had a list of notes of things that were political that I wanted to ask, but we got into a 40-minute conversation about art.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop him and say, sorry, we need to move on to the next thing. I'm going to shut up. So I've absolutely encountered it. And I would just say, look, just you do you. It all comes down to whether you can sleep at night knowing you're being inauthentic.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I just want to be able to have an interesting conversation with someone. And if you like it, great. If you don't like it, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've had, some of the post-millennial audience is so political that I've had even some people say like, oh, the Jordan Peterson thing just didn't touch on Trudeau at all. It's like, well, we're not going to touch on Trudeau. Yeah. Right? Because some of the audience are just like the fuck Trudeau audience. Right? Yeah. And it's like, yeah. They're like, well, don't you hate Trudeau? I'm like, yeah. And I've talked about that elsewhere. Yeah. I'm not going to have the most prominent psychologist in the world come on and say, hey, you hate Trudeau too, don't you? Yeah. Let's talk for an hour and a half about that. Right. Because then that's all you are after is you're just the fuck Trudeau guy. Yeah. And that's all you'll ever be, right? Instead of being, Nick, instead of being Angelo, like you have to be yourself because people are eclectic. So that's what I would say. And it comes through too, because now if you force, if the conversation naturally wants to go somewhere else and you force fuck Trudeau in there, now it's not a genuine conversation. And now people can feel that. Now it comes across to people as disingenuous. And that is the first thing that people sniff. And as soon as you smell disingenuousness in this new format with podcasts, which all people are looking for, just genuine conversation, you're dead in the water. And I feel like that's where you have to keep it trained, right? Like, and I love that you say that because like I have a whole page of notes of things that I wanted to talk to you about today. And the conversation went where it went. And there were so many things, right? Like being an Albertan, right? The conversation you had on separatism was an amazing conversation that I'm sure, again, I'll have to have you back on and we'll, talk about that. Religion, referendum, equalization payments, that conversation you had with Shelby Steele and the freedom versus oppression. And like, I could literally keep you here for 6 hours and we could talk about all these things, but it's just about knowing that. And that's what I like about too, is letting the time limit go wherever, because if somebody is going to do an hour, we'll cover those topics and you let it go where you go. And now
not only did I have all this backup of things I want to talk about for next time, but I've come up with probably 20 more topics just in this conversation today that I want to get to. And it's just so open-ended, but just leaving that. Whereas if I was so focused on these topics and getting to those, we never would have explored any new territory. And you almost sacrifice your future self for what you could accomplish in one conversation. And just to know, and I feel like that's the confidence, just to know that, right? Like it almost hurt my soul to hear you to say, if I want to have this conversation on iconography, I don't know if my fans are going to come, because I feel like, no, fuck that. Your fans, they want you. They listen to it for you, right? Like when I listened to all this conversation, there were great topics and stuff, but I was listening to your ideas on it. And that's why I knew me and you would have a great conversation, because I got to see through those conversations who you are. And I'm interested in you. Like whatever we talk about, I'm interested in your take on it. And even some topics that I've talked about already on the podcast, I want to re-bring them out to you to see what you have on it, because somebody said this one time. I feel like an opposing mind is the whetstone that sharpens the sword of your own, or whatever that saying is, right? Like I love to look for people that have sharp intellects that is going to test your ideas, and to do that and to find, but if you try and force that into something, your sword's going to break. It just doesn't work. It needs to be a natural process. And that's where I'm excited to keep that, or I guess that maybe I shouldn't say I'm excited for. I'm nervous about the same sort of things you are. Are my fans going to go into this, right? Every time I jump on a new topic, like I did one on streaming, which is for my audience, Northern Alberta, not real streaming into people, right? And it goes well, but just to, like Joe Rogan says, just say fuck it, to even think about what people want, and just do what interests you, and you'll get there. And I so believe that. So I hope you chase those things wherever that takes you, because I'll be here to listen to it. I like who you are, and I want to learn from you. And I think your fans will too. And just to have faith in that, I feel like that's that scariness. That's that dragon that's in the dark that everyone's so worried about, but you just got to face it. And that's where the gold lies. It's behind that stuff. That's where the scariness is. And like, I don't know, I feel like you'll know this lesson just as well as I do. The things that scare you the most, that is where the best stuff is, and just keep chasing that. And I just want to say thanks for coming on with me today. I know there's a million other things we want to talk about, and I hope you had a good time here today, and hopefully we can do it again sometime and dive into even more of those topics. But before we do, is there anything else we missed? Is there any important pieces that you'd like to cap it off with, any other subjects to squeak in here quick?
Well, first of all, I want to say likewise to everything you're doing, and I'm going to follow everything you're doing closely, and I hope we can do it again. There's a million things that we've missed that we can talk about, but I think, to end it off, Jordan Peterson talked about with Joe Rogan at one point about how every conversation is sort of like a phoenix, and in the beginning it dies, in the end it's reborn. It's very hyperbolic, but I've taken that to heart, and I feel like I walk away from every conversation feeling like that was valuable, and that's how I feel about this. So thank you for having me on. People can find my stuff on Twitter, Post Millennial, if you go there. YouTube, the Post Millennial on YouTube. On Facebook, you can find me there. You can find me at the Free Speech Club as well.
Free Speech Club.
And,
okay.
Stay tuned for more content.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you again. That was so much fun.
All right. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right, just a shorty for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said in the intro, I'm sure I'll be having Angelo on in the future sometime to get more in depth on some of these subjects. But it was just with the time we had, it was really fun just to cruise over a couple of the topics that we discussed and kind of see a little bit of where Angelo's coming from and how he got his start. I was very fascinated by all that, and I hope you guys can pick up on that too, and I hope it was interesting to you. Other than that, hope you guys are doing well. Hope things are looking up, and all those other things I say every single week. Follow the VonDubCast on Instagram and Twitter. That really helps me out. Share this episode with a friend. Check out any of the guests, what they're promoting. That really helps. The only thing that's going to help me get bigger guests on is to prove to people that if they do come onto this show, it's going to be a good thing for them. And I depend on you guys to do that. So go check out Angelo on the Post Millennial. Go check out his shows. He does a really great hour-long interview with Jordan Peterson with some and covers some really uniquely Canadian, Albertan, and Western Canadian topics that I think a lot of you will be interested in if you go and check that out. So just type his name into Google. You'll find him. Check him out. If you enjoy him, let him know you've heard of him here. That really helps the podcast. And other than that, I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.